The morning began like any other quiet Tuesday in Cypress Creek Estates. It was our peaceful little neighborhood where the loudest thing you'd usually hear was a lawnmower or a dog barking at the mailman. I was sitting on my front porch, coffee in hand, when 6 black SUVs suddenly rolled up to the house directly across the street. Within moments, federal agents in dark windbreakers were swarming the property. The jackets were stamped with bold yellow letters reading FBI. They streamed through Barbara Sterling's front door with absolute military precision, hauling out heavy box after box of sensitive financial documents. Barbara stood on her lawn in her fuzzy slippers and her trademark HOA president sash. She was frantically shouting that this was all a giant misunderstanding about voluntary contributions. But let me rewind a bit. I am Mark Henderson, and my family moved into Cypress Creek Estates just 3 months ago. We thought we had finally found our absolute dream home. It was located at 842 Willowbrook Court. It was a gorgeous colonial with a wide porch and a big backyard where our 3 kids could run wild. And the absolute cherry on top. Thanks to an old property line loophole from the 1970s, we were exempt. Our new home wasn't technically part of the Cypress Creek HOA at all. We genuinely thought that was an incredible blessing. However, Barbara Sterling did not see it that way. She saw us as a massive problem. The day after we moved in, she showed up on our doorstep like clockwork. She had a clipboard in hand and a fake smile sharp enough to cut glass. Despite the 90-degree heat, she wore a heavy, formal blazer. The blazer had HOA President elegantly embroidered in bright gold thread, as if it were a military badge of honor. She introduced herself with the kind of practiced politeness only people in power seem to perfect. She casually mentioned that although we weren't technically required to join, it would be in our best interest to contribute. She demanded the monthly dues of $95 like it wasn't even a question. I smiled and told her politely that since our property wasn't part of the HOA, we simply wouldn't be paying any dues. That fake smile of hers faltered just slightly before morphing into a very tight, angry grimace. She warned me I was making a huge mistake. She claimed everyone in Cypress Creek contributes to the community fund. Then she dropped the phrase that would quickly become her favorite, highly manipulative weapon. Neighborhood harmony depends on universal participation, she said coldly. I simply thanked her for her time and firmly closed the front door. That was my first major mistake. Barbara Sterling didn't handle rejection well. The targeted harassment began very subtly. Each morning, I would find a brand new flyer tucked securely under my windshield wiper. They were supposedly cheerful pamphlets about the many benefits of HOA membership. At first, the flyers seemed entirely harmless, but soon the bold headlines grew much more unsettling. They featured creepy phrases like unity through compliance and the hidden dangers of neighborhood nonconformity. Then came the awful notes stuffed in our mailbox. They were passive-aggressive reminders about maintaining strict community standards. Soon, Barbara started appearing at the very edge of our property with a tape measure. She meticulously recorded the exact height of our grass and the specific angle of our trash bins. One morning, I caught her crouched near our flower bed, measuring the distance between our decorative rose bushes. When I asked what on earth she was doing, she looked me dead in the eye. Optimal row spacing is absolutely critical for property values, she stated perfectly seriously. She was not joking in the slightest. She even carried a thick, color-coded binder. It was completely filled with insane guidelines for plant placement. These were strict neighborhood guidelines she had apparently written entirely by herself. My wife, Jessica, found it pretty funny at first. She would happily wave at Barbara through the window while the woman furiously scribbled notes. But the laughter completely stopped the day Barbara crossed a major line. Barbara actually started photographing our kids playing in the front yard. She began posting the pictures on the neighborhood Facebook page. The horrible captions read things like, "Unsupervised children lowering safety standards." That was the exact moment Jessica's amusement turned into pure, protective anger. And it only got worse from there. Barbara started writing long, incredibly self-righteous essays on the community Facebook page. She claimed that non-HOA homes constantly attract undesirable elements. She even made completely fake charts. She claimed that property values within 500 feet of a non-HOA house drop 30% every year. That is when I decided to try the diplomatic route. I invited her over for coffee, thinking maybe a friendly, adult conversation would ease the tension. I thanked her for deeply caring about our shared neighborhood. But I firmly asked her to please respect our family's privacy. She smiled, nodded, and told me she completely understood my concerns. She even warmly complimented Jessica's homemade banana bread before leaving. Just 2 days later, a police cruiser pulled up to our house. The officer explained they had received a serious report about a possible fence height violation. He quickly measured the fence and found absolutely nothing wrong. He then mentioned it was the third complaint that week, all from the exact same person. The officer, a tired-looking man named Deputy Collins, sighed heavily. He told me quietly that Barbara was well known to the department. She called emergency services so often that they had actually made her a dedicated file. Deputy Collins strongly suggested I start documenting absolutely everything she did. That night, Jessica decided she had enough. You see, my wife isn't just incredibly smart. Jessica is a highly trained forensic accountant. That means she is professionally trained to notice exactly when money simply doesn't add up on the balance sheets. So while I focused on carefully photographing Barbara's daily harassment, Jessica turned her professional attention to the Cypress Creek HOA's finances. And what she quickly uncovered was deeply interesting. The supposed HOA collected $95 a month from 142 homes. That was over $13,000 monthly. But where exactly was all of this massive amount of cash actually going? The only community projects we had ever seen were a few cheap new flower beds. There was also a single summer picnic that couldn't have cost more than $500 to throw. Something was terribly wrong here. Jessica tried the formal route first. She requested official financial statements through the proper legal channels. Barbara completely ignored every single one of them. Instead of complying, she fiercely doubled down. She started hosting loud HOA meetings in her backyard. She conveniently positioned her massive speakers to face directly at our house. Every meeting was exactly the same, featuring hours of self-righteous speeches. She ranted about the extreme dangers of non-compliance. She complained loudly about certain stubborn households that selfishly refused to contribute to the greater good. And that is when Jessica decided to dig much deeper. Jessica's deep investigation uncovered something truly unbelievable. The Cypress Creek HOA wasn't even a real, legally registered nonprofit. It had never formally filed for tax-exempt status with the federal government. It wasn't registered with the state at all, and it had zero legitimate legal oversight. Barbara Sterling had been collecting over $160,000 a year under the false guise of community dues. She operated completely without a real board, without any actual elections, and without a single ounce of financial transparency. Through public records requests and clever digging, Jessica traced Barbara's wild spending. What she found could have been ripped straight from a television crime show. There were massive purchases for a luxury hot tub. There were also multiple expensive, all-inclusive vacations to the Bahamas. Bizarrely, there was an entire expensive collection of ceramic unicorns. Barbara had officially logged these ridiculous statues as vital neighborhood beautification projects. But the real kicker was the kitchen. She expensed a $40,000 luxury kitchen renovation. She legally listed it under HOA headquarters improvements. Jessica meticulously compiled all her shocking findings into a highly detailed forensic report. She expertly cross-referenced each highly suspicious purchase. She compared them with the official HOA meeting minutes Barbara had filed with the local county. The main problem was that those meetings never happened. Not a single one of them had occurred. Jessica went door to door, quietly interviewing our neighbors, who all said the exact same thing. They had never attended a single quarterly meeting in the history of the neighborhood. Most of the neighbors didn't even know a meeting was supposedly held. When our massive report was finally complete, Jessica submitted it to the IRS. She also sent it to the state attorney general to cover our bases. And just to be absolutely safe, she submitted everything to the FBI's white-collar crime division. Then, we quietly waited in the shadows. Meanwhile, Barbara was rapidly spiraling. She launched an all-out war against us. She wanted to make our lives totally miserable. She called the police, falsely claiming we were running an illegal, unlicensed daycare just because the neighborhood kids played safely in our large front yard. She maliciously reported our sweet dog, Buster, to local animal control. She had the audacity to call him a dangerous public menace. She even filed a completely fake complaint with the county health department. She falsely accused us of improper, hazardous garbage storage. The false reports only grew more and more ridiculous. When I took cute family photos in our backyard, she claimed we were operating a commercial business. When we hosted a fun birthday party for our 8-year-old, she actually called the police to report a highly suspicious gathering. She even called the local fire marshal to urgently report our allegedly unsafe grill usage. Every single agency investigated and found absolutely nothing wrong. A few officials quietly admitted they were getting extremely tired of her endless antics. Deputy Collins told me the department was keeping strict records. They were documenting all of her completely false reports. They were even seriously considering charging her with the criminal misuse of emergency services. Then came Barbara's absolute, undeniable, fatal mistake. She confidently sent out a formal letter to every single resident. She announced that due to supposedly new state regulations, HOA dues were being increased to $150 a month, effective immediately. The terrifying letter threatened severe legal action. It even threatened property liens against absolutely anyone who failed to pay. The letterhead looked highly official, complete with a fake state registration number. It included bolded, scary phrases like, "Failure to comply may strictly result in immediate wage garnishment." That cruel letter hit the neighborhood hard. Many of the residents were elderly or living on fixed incomes. A young family down the street had just gone through a devastating medical emergency. Barbara's empty threats genuinely terrified them. But when they showed up at the next outdoor HOA meeting to protest, she didn't care. Barbara absolutely refused to back down. She told them coldly that financial hardship simply wasn't her problem. She stated that maintaining high property values requires serious personal sacrifice from everyone. Unfortunately for her, one of those frustrated residents was Robert Carmichael. Robert happened to be a retired federal prosecutor, and he wasn't buying her fake story at all. He immediately started digging on his own. When Robert eventually compared his extensive notes with Jessica's forensic accounting, the massive scope of the corruption came to light. Robert still had many powerful, active friends in federal law enforcement. A few discreet phone calls later, things started moving incredibly quickly. The financial evidence was totally overwhelming. Barbara had successfully embezzled more than $400,000 over 6 long years. She was filing completely false tax returns and running the neighborhood HOA like her own personal, untraceable slush fund. Robert discovered that Barbara had even been expertly falsifying official meeting minutes. She was falsely claiming unanimous resident votes for every single measure she introduced. This included an insane measure that officially named her HOA president for life, complete with a $60,000 annual salary. The supposed board of directors was completely fake. She had legally listed people who had moved away years ago and even invented completely random names. One imaginary board member apparently was named Susie Sparkles. Robert later found out through some digging that Susie Sparkles was actually the name of Barbara's favorite childhood doll. When Robert and Jessica presented their combined airtight findings to the federal authorities, The authorities were actually already investigating thanks to Jessica's brilliant original report. The case absolutely exploded. Federal investigators quickly uncovered Barbara's numerous, highly secret offshore bank accounts. They found a registered shell company called Sterling Community Management, LLC. It supposedly existed solely for neighborhood enhancement. In reality, it existed for one single, highly illegal purpose. It was perfectly designed for funneling stolen HOA funds straight into Barbara's personal checking accounts. And that brings us right back to that beautiful Tuesday morning. It was just 3 months after we moved in. I stood quietly on my porch, watching those 6 black SUVs pull up across the street. FBI agents completely swarmed Barbara's house. They hauled out dozens of boxes of files, computers, and binders of doctored records. They even found her real physical accounting books cleverly hidden in the attic. They were complete with detailed handwritten notes explaining exactly how she siphoned money. One entry even described her greedy future plans. She had documented specific plans to expand her illegal operations to defraud neighboring HOAs. When agents finally led Barbara out in cold, heavy handcuffs, she was still yelling. She insisted it was all a misunderstanding. She violently screamed at me specifically. She claimed that if I had just paid my fair share, absolutely none of this would have happened. She shouted that I had single-handedly destroyed the harmony of Cypress Creek Estates. She warned that our property values would immediately collapse without her brilliant leadership. But it was finally over. The intense federal investigation revealed the full, horrifying picture of her massive crime spree. She was formally charged with mail fraud, wire fraud, heavy tax evasion, and racketeering. Even her ridiculous collection of ceramic unicorns, valued at $30,000, were officially listed as embezzled assets. At her dramatic trial, Barbara tried to claim she truly thought she was entitled to the stolen money. She said it was fair compensation for her hard work. The prosecutor didn't even flinch at her ridiculous defense. He simply pointed to one of her lavish purchases. It was a massive luxury boat named the Civic Duty, bought entirely with stolen HOA funds. He calmly reminded the silent court that Cypress Creek Estates doesn't even have a lake. Barbara desperately tried to argue that the boat was strictly for community lake patrols. The jury was not impressed in the slightest. She was swiftly convicted on every single federal charge brought against her. The judge was clearly exhausted by Barbara's dramatic outbursts and constant courtroom interruptions. He sentenced her to a hard 5 years in federal prison. He also ordered $487,000 in restitution. She had to pay it all back to the defrauded homeowners. For the very first time since we had moved in, Barbara's icy composure completely shattered. She sobbed uncontrollably at the defense table. She was still loudly insisting she had done absolutely nothing wrong. She cried that she had earned that money through her tireless dedication to the neighborhood. As the bailiffs forcefully led her away, she was still screaming. She warned that Cypress Creek would crumble without her and that property values would plummet. She screamed that we would all deeply regret it. But standing there, watching her disappear through those heavy courtroom doors, I realized something incredibly profound. For the first time in many months, our beautiful neighborhood was actually quiet. It was truly, wonderfully quiet. And that sweet silence was the undeniable sound of absolute freedom.